Hello everybody and welcome to the Thursday edition of Video Clips. And today I want to deal with a topic that I hear about all the time, and it's confusion. I was speaking with somebody yesterday, really bright woman, who was saying that one of the reasons why she was uncomfortable maybe getting into the business of helping people with health is how confusing it was when so many experts think differently about so many things. And I told her, I said, you're exactly right. A lot of experts do have different opinions. So you have to have some way of sorting this out, because if not, you degenerate into, I call it the he said, she said. He said this and she said that. My doctor says this and your doctor says that. And this book says this and somebody else's book says that. And he said, she said, they said, my neighbor said, my uncle's best friend's neighbor's mother said. And you cannot ever sort that out. And it's both consumers and practitioners that find themselves in this difficult situation where you're just in this constant turmoil of trying to figure out what's right, and you can't hold on to a thought for very long before a contrary and competing idea comes along, and it is confusing. So we'll agree the public is confused about a lot of health-related issues. That's both consumers and practitioners. And confusion stands in the way of good decision making. A lot of the confusion results from the fact that you can advocate for almost any diet, food, supplement, drug, or medical practice using studies and articles published in medical journals and presenting experts who support the claims made. There is something to support everything. I've often said, if somebody wanted a reason to go downtown and direct traffic at noon while eating chocolate and claiming to lose weight from doing it, I'm sure you can find a study that says it's okay to do that. There are published studies promoting a paleo diet and saying that it's best, and published studies and experts proclaiming that a plant-based diet is best, and then there are published studies and experts recommending population screening and supplementation with vitamin D and population screening for mammograms and the MTHFR gene mutation, and you go on and on and on. And even though many of these practices are really proven to be more harmful than helpful, you still find experts that promote them. Well, consumers read a book, attend a lecture, or take a course, and they think they can make a good decision based on what they know, and then they're confronted with information that is the polar opposite of what they've learned. It paralyzes people, just like the person I was speaking with yesterday, who have important decisions to make, particularly people like cancer patients who have to select treatments. Where diet is concerned, the confusion can result in people continuing to eat a terrible diet, since there seems to be no consensus on which diet is actually the right diet to eat. Well, I've watched this go on for years, and I've spent an awful lot of time re-educating members on many issues after they've been exposed to information contrary to what they've learned from us. No one wins if the whole thing revolves around me citing studies and experts supporting my statements with the other side citing their studies and experts, and we're back to the he said, she said, and they said. There's no conclusion to be reached on almost any issue when an individual's or organization's point of view is the basis for making recommendations. And in fact, one of the things that is the bane of my existence, and it's like nails on a chalkboard for me, is the adoption of science as a point of view. It's resulted in a significant degeneration of how we talk about very important health-related issues. Well, the way to resolve this, in my opinion, is to establish some criteria for how information will be filtered that most reasonable people can agree on. And really, it's not a whole lot different than the rules that govern playing football or any other sport. Both teams meet to compete. They already know the rules of the game. There are a certain number of team members, certain objectives to be met, unbiased criteria for determining if the objectives have been met and who won the game, and so on. Referees are employed to make sure that both sides play by the rules. There are even criteria for who is allowed to play. I am not permitted to play in the NFL, for example, just in case you were wondering. I might like football, but at 62 years of age and 125 pounds, I'm not going to be invited to join the Atlanta Falcons anytime soon, all right? We do not debate this kind of thing. These are established rules, published and agreed on. Thus, sportscasters don't spend time Sunday evening after the football game interviewing people who offer their opinion on who won the game. We interview people about how the game was played, team members about how they intend to play differently next week, and coaches about strategies they use to train their athletes. And this is what we have to do if we're going to have a scientific discussion about diet, health, and medicine. To address this very important issue, a few years ago, a few friends and colleagues of mine sat down and we established our own criteria for evaluating information in order to reduce confusion for the people we help with health issues. When these criteria are used, confusion is eliminated for many issues, and we've even seen those of us who seem to want to vociferously disagree with us kind of refusing to engage with us and go away. They don't want to have a rules-based discussion, which I think speaks volumes about the type of evidence that they use to support their claims. So I'm going to share with you a few of the things that we use as rules here. And I'm going to propose that we use rules when we're having a discussion, just like you have to have rules for football. You have to have rules for everything. I mean, think about what would happen if we lived in a society where there weren't any rules about everything. I mean, we live in total chaos all the time. All right, so rule number 1, all experts are not created equal. One of my pet peeves is the media's tendency to present both points of view, which sounds like a good idea, but what it ends up being is an expert from each side. While the presentation of different viewpoints is a good idea, I agree, various experts should be well matched in terms of education and accomplishment, but this doesn't happen. Often two people who have widely divergent backgrounds and levels of expertise are presented as having equal standing. So a good example of this is a scientist like Colin Campbell, who's published over 300 articles in medical journals, presents evidence supporting a plant-based diet. And then the other side is presented by Gary Taubes, a columnist at the New York Times, who wrote a book on eating animal foods. Seriously, these are not equal. So going back to my football analogy, think about the coach from the Ohio State Buckeyes, Urban Meyer, who's one of the winningest coaches we've ever had at Ohio State, discussing football strategy, along with a contrarian point of view from an accountant from Atlanta who's an avid fan of football and has watched every NFL game that he's been able to since 1975. I mean, you would never have these two people paired on a sports show to discuss football, okay? I mean, Urban Meyer wouldn't show up for it. Nobody would watch it. And the NFL would go out of business if they let people like me play the game. You have to have rules for who plays the game. You have to have rules for who's allowed to talk about it. So that's the first thing. All experts are not considered equal. The mere fact that somebody wrote a best-selling book doesn't make them an expert. And by the way, even the fact that somebody won a Nobel Prize. I had somebody tell me the other day, well, I was reading this book about this guy, written by this guy who advocates olive oil, and he was nominated for a Nobel Prize. Well, I'll tell you about Nobel Prizes. You know the guy who thought up lobotomizing mental health patients? He won a Nobel Prize. Okay, so does that mean we should go back to lobotomizing people who have psychological issues? Well, if all it takes is a Nobel Prize, then we should go back to doing it. All right, here's the second thing. Any proposed intervention must result in improved long-term outcomes, not just changes in surrogate markers. And this applies to dietary supplements, diets, drugs, and procedures. So, for example, statin drugs and high-dose niacin both lower cholesterol, but they have very little impact on the risk of heart attack, stroke, or death for most people. For the average person, statins, the risk reduction is about 2%. All right, there is a very specific group of people, few groups of people who benefit from statins, but if you look at the whole general population, about a 2% reduction in the risk of stroke, heart attack, and all-cause mortality. Now, let's look at Dr. Esselstyn's research at Cleveland Clinic. He's followed his patients for over 30 years now, and he has shown that a low-fat, plant-based diet keeps patients with terminal coronary artery disease alive for decades. Dr. Esselstyn's research carries significantly more weight because he shows real, meaningful improvement in health and significantly better long-term outcomes. So I'm not suggesting we don't pay attention to surrogate markers. I'm suggesting that we don't gauge our success solely on the manipulation of surrogate markers, and we look at long-term health outcomes for patients. Number 3. Storytelling is not considered evidence. I always assume positive intent and honesty until I'm shown evidence to the contrary. So when people tell me stories, I believe they're true. I remember doing a talk at a bookstore in Boston one time, and this guy said, when it was time for the Q&A, my uncle ate bacon, eggs, and cheese 3 times a day, lived to be 94 years old, and died in his sleep. I believe him. Okay, I've heard I had a flu shot last year, and I didn't get the flu. But here's my point. These are people telling their stories. And this is considerably different than looking at a large body of evidence to determine what is likely to happen to a big number of people who engage in the same behavior. So let's look at the bacon, eggs, and cheese. If you look at the evidence, you really look at a lot of research studies, it is not likely that most of us are going to get away with eating bacon, eggs, and cheese 3 times a day and live to be 94 years old. So we have to separate the storytelling from the real thing. Another analogy I can use is I know people who drink too much, and they frequently drive after having a lot of alcohol, and they've never had a DUI. I don't think any of us would take that information and say it's safe to drive after drinking a lot of alcohol. You probably won't get caught. But it's done all the time, and it's even done by doctors who should know better. Lauren Cordain's The Paleo Diet is largely supported with stories of people who gave up pizza and cupcakes and started eating wild elk and deer and lost weight. Others engage in conjecture related to the paleo diet about what people ate 6 million years ago while wandering the earth looking for food. The stories and conjecture are pretty meaningless, and I don't understand why we even debate what people ate 6 million years ago, because we know exactly what people are eating right now, and we pretty much know their health outcomes too. So here's the thing. I've given you a few examples, but one of the things that I think differentiates what we're doing here, and this is what we teach both consumers and we teach healthcare practitioners as well, is how to apply specific criteria for filtering and evaluating information. These are just examples of how we apply the filters. This helps consumers make a lot of sense out of the massive amount of contradictory information they're confronted with about health every day. And it reduces the amount of time we spend responding to critics, to tell you the truth. I mean, when people send me hate mail about things I say on this channel, for example, I invite them to bring their studies. I've even told people, I'll fly you to Columbus. We'll be on YouTube together. We can have a debate. I'm going to send you some criteria for the types of studies we can consider for our debate. And guess how many of them have appeared on YouTube with me? Now, if you've been watching for a while, you know the answer to that question. None. Because people don't want to engage in a debate when there are rules associated with the debate. But without rules, we just degenerate, like I said, back to the he said, she said, they said, the neighbor said. And you can't get anywhere doing that. In our world, rules are employed to govern everything, ranging from sports to how corporations are run and laws are passed. In the absence of rules, chaos results. Enterprising charlatans take advantage of chaos to sell their ideas about diet and health, and this can be stopped by applying objective rules and evaluating all of these things. All right, so remember, we're on a campaign to increase subscribers, so push subscribe, hit the bell so you can be notified about any time we post anything, and tell your friends, because as soon as we hit 25,000, the first gift certificate gets issued, and we're going to keep upping the ante every time we add another 25,000 subscribers. Thanks for watching. As usual, pass this on to anybody who you think would enjoy watching it, and I will be back to you next week with more news.